Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, we are so happy to have as our guest Dr. Stephen Sinatra. Dr. Sinatra is a cardiologist and best-selling author of many books, including Heartbreak and Heart Disease. And he talks about certain bad habits that can weigh more heavily on the heart than people realize. Of course, there are many well-known bad habits for the heart, such as drinking alcohol, and we'll talk about more with Dr. Sinatra. And he is a fellow of the American College of Cardiologists and American College of Nutrition. So that's a really great combination. And he is also a certified nutritional specialist with the American Nutrition Association and also a certified bioenergetic psychotherapist. We'll talk to him about that, as well as a very well-known author, speaker, and advisor for the research and development of nutritional supplements with healthy directions. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Sinatra.
Oh, it's great to be here, Ellen. Thank you.
And I know you have a myriad of interests and a myriad of topics that you have been lecturing on for so many years. Let's talk about what would be the concept of heartbreak and heart disease, because that seems to bring together your deep knowledge in both psychotherapy and cardiology, which is something that I think should be addressed all the time, but isn't.
Yeah, actually, it's something that always intrigued me, even when I was training in cardiology. I'll never forget it, Ellen. It was in the mid-'70s. The Vietnam War was winding down, and I was a board-certified internist, and I decided to go into cardiology. So I extended my training another 2 years. As I was working as a fellow in cardiology, I was in the cardiac catheterization lab for almost approximately 2 years doing, coronary angiograms on people. And I was noticing that a lot of males, particularly males, only a few females, but more males than females at that time, were getting sudden death and heart attack, and they were only in their mid-30s to, let's say, early 40s. And it really bothered me because, I was only a couple of years younger. And it was just amazing. When I was doing cardiac catheterizations on men who were 35 years old, who were working at either, the Groton Sub-Base or Colt Firearms or Pratt & Whitney Aircraft. Again, when the war was ending and these men were looking for jobs, they lost their jobs. They couldn't find other jobs. It was a loss of self-esteem. It was a loss of their productivity in the world, and it was incredible heartbreak. And I was in a psychotherapy program a training program at the same time. And I decided that, oh my gosh, here I am seeing these men who are getting, heart attack and suffering heartbreak, and some of them had sudden death. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book Heartbreak and Heart Disease, because training in psychotherapy with emotions and feelings and training in cardiovascular disease with the physical aspects of heart disease, I intertwined the emotional and physical. And again, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. And I was only, in my mid-30s, and it took me 10 years to write the book, but I was taking my notes. I was recording, a lot of sessions. And again, a lot of that information took 10 years to really, put together.
Well, Dr. Sinatra, and I do want to remind our listeners that they can find you at drsinatra.com. And from there, I'm sure there's links to your Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and all that interesting information, the many books that you have written. You are really a wise leader for our time. How does that relate, do you think, to what's going on now with our recent pandemic crisis and people losing their jobs and having their whole schedule completely taken over?
Well, yeah, that's an important point, because Whenever you have lockdowns and masks, masks, especially in children, young children don't understand it. It raises the possibility of suspicion. You don't want children growing up who are, suspicious or, feeling the possibility of harm or, any of these emotions. So, given the zeitgeist of the times or the spirit of the times, we're living in an area or really, a time where, uncertainty creates an enormous sort of discharge of cortisol. That's the hormone of vigilance. That's the hormone of fear. That's the hormone, Ellen, of waiting for the other shoe to drop, so to speak. And whenever the body has an overabundance of cortisol or adrenaline or noradrenaline, these hormones can have a damaging effect on the body. And they can lead to high blood pressure, cardiac arrhythmias, more fat in the blood, more what we call blood coagulation, a more platelet activity in the blood, lower potassium in the blood. And all these factors associated with vigilance or fear or heartbreak or, any of these emotions, unconnectedness, in other words, not going out in society, not participating in society. These feelings can have a sort of an accumulative effect. And I'll tell you, as a heart specialist, have incredible, and I mean incredible, undesirable facets on the cardiovascular system.
Yeah, so that's something that I think you really so uniquely understand, that link between the physical and the emotional. And heart disease is interesting because I know that many people seem to get heart disease as a sequelae after experiencing a COVID infection. It's one of the things that's linked also to long COVID, and also interesting as a side effect when those people get side effects to vaccinations. It seems to irritate the heart lining and cause all kinds of cardiovascular issues.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I'm really privy to this aspect of cardiology. COVID does attack the heart. We call that myocarditis. Vaccinations can have a significant negative impact on the heart as well. I mean, even in the VARS data, we've seen myocarditis in especially males, young males, aged 18 to 35. That seems to be a sweet spot for myocarditis. And myocarditis should not be taken lightly, Ellen. I mean, as a heart specialist, myocarditis, can be a harbinger of the heart going out of a rhythm. We call that arrhythmia. It can certainly cause sudden death. We've seen lots of sudden death in not only American athletes, but European athletes as well. So with the pandemic and the virus, and so what happens is the virus locks into what we call the ACE receptor. And a lot of these receptors, these ACE receptors, are in the heart muscle itself. They're in the kidney, they're in the brain, they're in the small intestine. But the heart is a vital organ. And when these receptors are locked in, with the viral component, it can cause damage over time. And that's why you mentioned long COVID. And also, the possibility of vaccinations being incriminated as well.
So there's so many links between what's going on in our world and heart wellness, and then looking at also that connection between what you do with lifestyle and how that affects your heart. And I think people probably know, let's say becoming a total alcoholic and being really sedentary and smoking cigarettes and eating junk food, those all can certainly negatively impact heart health and wellness.
Well, yeah. In other words, you're bringing up an excellent point. I mean, with the lockdowns and, with all the restriction in society and stuff like that, a lot of people are going to alcohol or even drugs, for example. We're seeing a lot of suicide in children at this time. And again, whenever you get these overwhelming situations of fear, and fear is the key word here. A lot of us are living in fear. And as I mentioned before, fear has the most undesirable impact on the cardiovascular system because of the overzealous discharge of hormones I mentioned previously. So what we need to do as a society is uplift ourselves. We have to look at our, cup being half full as opposed to half empty. We need to be more optimistic instead of pessimistic. And we need to live our lives and basically, be the people that we are. And the most important thing is we need to be productive without being self-destructive at the same time. In other words, we need to take our vitamin D. We need to eat less sugars. If you're overweight, we need to lose weight. If we have high blood pressure, we need to get our blood pressure down. We need to attenuate not only our cardiovascular risk profile, but the COVID-19 risk profile as well. So it's important. I mean, COVID-19 can be, sort of the emphasis of getting our cardiovascular risk factor situations in order. And in other words, it can have a good side to it. I'll tell you, I was at an American College of Nutrition meeting, Ellen, about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I was bringing up some shocking news. I mean, there's about 100 million people in this country who not only have type 1 diabetes and type 2, but they're insulin resistant at the same time. In other words, they are pre-diabetic. And with diabetes being a number one comorbidity, not only in heart disease risk, but also in COVID-19, it only makes sense that as a nation, we try to lower the incidence of diabetes in this country. And it's not rocket science. It's, you need to lose weight. You need to take in more, healthy proteins, more healthy fats, eliminate a lot of simple sugars and take in less carbohydrates. When you do this, your blood sugar falls. And whenever your blood sugar falls, you get more resilience to your immune system because every doctor on the planet knows that when you have higher blood sugars, it tends to stifle what we call our white blood cell or our phagocytosis activity. It stifles the immune system. So when you have lower blood sugars, and by the way, the American College of Physicians, the American College of Cardiology, the forces to be. I mean, when you and I were younger, a fasting blood sugar of 100 was considered normal. Then they dropped it to 90, and now it's dropped to 70. So in other words, if you have a fasting blood sugar of 80, that's considered, a coronary artery risk factor. So when it comes to blood sugar, the lower the better. And again, with diabetes running rampant in this country, or pre-diabetes or insulin resistance, as Americans, we need to take responsibility for that. And we really need to, get our blood sugars down, especially in this pandemic as well.
So that's great information. And I want to reintroduce you so our listeners know that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC, and also on any of those podcast platforms that you might associate with or, download. I'm Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, and today my illustrious guest is Dr. Stephen Sinatra, who is the author of a great many books, including The Great Cholesterol Myth, Reversing Heart Disease Now, The CoQ10 Phenomenon, Heart Sense for Women, The Sinatra Solution, Metabolic Cardiology, and Heartbreak and Heart Disease. And more are coming down the pike, Dr. Sinatra has told me. So, we'll wait for some of those new ones and focus on all of that information. But when you're talking about the cholesterol myth, that was a fascinating book. We actually did a radio show about that because, that's why I just got blood work done. And the person I went to did these great tests. Like, for instance, she did one called Nutra-Eval. And even in my regular panel, she went deeply into all kinds of nutrient levels that I have. Now, I think this should be standard of practice. And by the way, it was covered by Medicare, believe it or not. So what a great insight. Now, my cholesterol is somewhat elevated. I'll say I'm in my 70s. But then she even said that's not a problem at all. because of all the information that you have shared in the cholesterol myth. She said, let's look at all these other parameters, your A1C and the size of the particles of that cholesterol. She said, no, you're not at any kind of cardiac risk. You don't have to go on a statin. Not that I would. But in other words, the information is there for cardiologists to correctly interpret these numbers.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a good physician, Ellen, because unfortunately, even today in 2022, there's so many cardiologists and board certified internists that look at high cholesterol and they call it a risk factor. And in my mind, it's not. It's only when that cholesterol becomes oxidized, when it becomes angry.
Well, it's not just in your mind. In your book, you talk about why that's not a scientific viewpoint, if you really understand it.
Correct. Yeah. In other words, cholesterol does a lot of good things. I mean, look, we're in a pandemic right now, and we know that vitamin D is absolutely, not only a knockout punch against COVID-19. When your levels are elevated where they should be, around 50 to 70 UGs per ml, we need a lot of vitamin D. There's no doubt about it. Now, I'm in Florida, and in the warm weather, when it's sunny, I walk outside to the beach and I ground on the beach because I really believe in the benefits of grounding. But, a lot of my skin is uncovered because I want the vitamin D. In other words, 30 minutes of sunlight on your skin is vital because you absorb, vitamin D from the sun, so to speak. And here's what happens when the vitamin D combines with you. In other words, when it hits the cholesterol in the skin, you form vitamin D3. So it's sunlight, cholesterol in the skin that forms vitamin D3. It's very important for us to consider cholesterol. I mean, people don't realize you need cholesterol to form, your sex hormones. You need cholesterol for integration of the neurons in the brain. So the brain.
What is your brain? What is that big fatty substance? The brain is like
exactly
loaded
the brain
with
cholesterol. Is mostly fat. Yeah. So basically, you need cholesterol for the neurons to talk to one another. And, you need cholesterol for your bile acids. There's so many things that cholesterol does, some good things to vilify it and to kill it. In this day and age, I think it's probably a sin. I mean, look, let's be honest here. If you have high Lp(a), now that's a small cholesterol subparticle.
Wait, I want you to tell our listeners again about that, because, of course, my doctor tested those particle sizes. So she was able to evaluate if my cholesterol number, first of all, my HDL was very high also, which is protective. But then she talked about these particles that you're explaining. Yeah,
the Lp(a) particle is a real cholesterol story. That's a very, very small cholesterol particle. It has what we call a disulfide bridge. It's very, very inflammatory. And it causes the blood to clot. Now, that's a bad combination when you have blood clotting with inflammation at the same time, because, people with high Lp(a)s, when I was practicing cardiology on a day-to-day basis, I would check that all the time because I realized that that's one of the real risk factors in the cholesterol story. And I wrote about that in the Great Cholesterol Myth as well. So I would attack high Lp(a)s. I would use niacin, CoQ10, in other words, lumbrokinase, certain nutraceuticals, because the cholesterol-lowering drugs can make Lp(a) worse. So it's important to really realize that, this is a small particle of cholesterol, and it's the real cholesterol story. Now, a lot of this Lp(a), because of the Biogenome Project, is carried genetically. That's why in family histories with heart attack someone in their 40s or 50s or sudden death for that matter, I always looked at Lp(a). And when I saw elevations in Lp(a), this is like 20 and 30 years ago when I was practicing cardiology on a day-to-day basis, I always attacked Lp(a) and tried to get the numbers down. And if I couldn't get the numbers down, I would use nutraceuticals that would at least attenuate the side effects of Lp(a). That's why I use lumbrokinase and nanokinase, because of the blood thinning capabilities. And that's why grounding really works as well, because the problem with 20th century man right now and 20th century women is that our blood is like red ketchup. We need our blood to be like red wine. And the problem is, with all the EMF in the environment, all the sugars in the environment, all these killer viruses of bacteria, all this stuff, this, whether it's wireless technologies or sugars or whatever it is, it's causing red ketchup blood. And when red ketchup blood clots in, let's say, the brain or the heart, these are vital organs, this can cause our demise. So, we need to be more productive and more cognizant of not producing red ketchup blood in our body. We want our blood to be like red wine. We want it to be thinner. The thinner, the better, and the more movement the blood has. And that's what, we talked about in the great cholesterol myth. And that's why I endorse grounding. And that's why I use less sugars, et cetera. And again, targeted nutraceuticals. A lot of targeted nutraceuticals support what we call endothelial cell function. This is where CoQ10 comes in, magnesium comes in on this, omega-3s. So there's lots of things people can do to protect themselves going forward in these very, very uncertain times.
Right. And I actually had those evaluated in the blood test. I mean, it looked at things like CoQ10, which is something easy to supplement, which I was surprised to find was low. But they said, well, just with normal aging, the body's ability to produce it. I'm glad
you brought that up. Yeah, yes, Ellen, this is a very, very important question. And this affects women more than men. I'll never forget, I asked Carl Folkers this question. He was the one that was given the formula of CoQ10 by Fred Crane about 50 years ago, and he worked at Merck Pharmaceuticals. And Carl Folkers, Dr. Folkers, deciphered the formula, and then Merck, unfortunately, sold it to the Japanese. I'm going back 5 decades. But, it's important to realize that, CoQ10 levels fall. In other words, our body makes CoQ10, our cells make CoQ10. But this is something that's really important for women to know. After the 7th decade of life in women, the body does not make CoQ10 as well as a man's body. And, I asked Carl Folkers this question when he was alive, and he got sort of angry at me. He said, you should know the answer to this question. But basically, a woman's liver, after the age of 70, she does not synthesize CoQ10 as well as a man's liver. So it's very important for women to take in this information. And that's why I believe that all women over the age of 70 should be taking at least 100 milligrams of a good quality ubiquinone or at least ubiquinol going forward, because, this can be life-saving. I mean, CoQ10 to me is still a miracle nutrient of the 21st century. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I believe CoQ10 is one of the most special nutrients we have going forward, and especially in this pandemic. I mean, somebody will write this paper, but remember, with COVID-19, we get enormous endothelial cell dysfunction. This results in blood clotting. I talked about the ACE2 receptors, where the virus locks into the ACE receptor. This causes enormous endothelial dysfunction and blood clotting. What CoQ10 does, it's a complete antidote. It reverses it. And we've got to remember, these pro-inflammatory cytokines that are released, like NF-kappa B, interleukin-6, C-reactive protein, these all have an undesirable effect on our cells in the body. And CoQ10 can rescue these cells because it's a direct combatant of these, inflammatory mediators. So I'm all in when it comes to CoQ10, whether in a pandemic or not.
I know. And so long ago, you had this information so long ago, and you even have a full book just on that, the CoQ10 Phenomenon. And people can find all these things by going to drsinatra.com. And that's spelled the same way as the famous singer Sinatra. But you just have so much information. Now, I know that you're very excited right now about something that is called earthing. And we're not having a tremendous amount of time left, but we'll bring you back to do a whole show on that. But just tell us about your excitement about this phenomena called earthing. It's not a phenomena, it's an old-fashioned thing, actually.
Yeah, this is amazing. About 15 years ago, I met Clint Ober at an American College of Cardiology meeting. He was sort of a TV engineer, and he was a cowboy from Montana. And he invited me to this bus he was in, and he had all this equipment. And he talked to me about earthing. And as a board-certified cardiologist, I really resonated with it. I was all in on the theory, But I said to him, Clint, you're going to have to invest millions and millions of dollars because nobody's going to believe you. You're going to have to put together clinical studies, placebo-controlled, double-blinded. They don't have to be large, but at least something to get the concept off the ground because, most physicians aren't going to believe it. And he did it. He spent millions and millions of dollars. He put together so many different researches. The researchers from not only this country, but Western Europe as well. There's been a lot of literature on earthing and grounding. About 25 papers have come out. Even papers out of famous universities, sort of like the University of Pennsylvania, for example. And I have to tell you that people and doctors and physicians, they're reading this information, and there's no doubt about it. Earthing has a special effect on the body. This is one of the reasons why I moved. I believe in the research so much. I've done a lot of the research myself, and earthing can be life-saving. In fact, even at the end of my career in cardiology, when I was seeing patients on a day-to-day basis, I was telling my followers that if you think you're having a heart attack, there's two things you need to do. Chew on an aspirin or a baby aspirin. Call an ambulance and go outside and put your feet while you're waiting for the ambulance on Mother Earth, on the earth, and that could be life-saving. And basically, even in the research we did, we showed that as soon as you put your feet on Mother Earth, it has an impact, on the cardiovascular system immediately. And, taking in this Mother Earth energy, we call it a Schumann resonance. People don't realize this, Ellen, but, the Earth is struck by lightning, especially around the equator, thousands of times per second. And the Earth is endowed with this electricity, and this electricity embellishes the Earth with all these electrons. And when you put your bare feet on the Earth, now I live in Florida, which is sort of the lightning capital of America. And I'll never forget it. I mean, every time we have a lightning storm, I'll go outside, I'll smell the ozone, and I'll put my bare feet on the wet grass or the wet concrete, and I'll take in this Schumann resonance. And it's almost like a energy. It's like a humming, like an om, of the yogis. The yogis would say the word om, and basically it's the same resonance as a Schumann resonance. We call it 7.83 hertz. That comes from the electrical discharge of lightning into the earth.
Well, you know what, Dr. Sinatra?
It heals the body.
We will go into that more deeply another time, but quite an amazing array of information you gave us on today's show. Everything from deep understanding of the cardiovascular system, for talking about nutrients such as CoQ10 and niacin. Of course, there's so much more to talk about. I suggest you visit Dr. Sinatra at drsinatra.com, and I'm sure from there you can get to Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. He's all over the place. He has an amazing amount of books and information and so much wisdom after years of being deeply committed integrative physician. So thank you so much for being our guest today, Dr. Sinatra.
Well, thank you, Ellen.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us once again here at Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.